I want to spend a little bit of time on Biden and the cable tantrum. But before we do that, there's the other threads I want you to hit on with Bloomberg that strike me as really important are that there's two trends with him that, again, are really, I think, put things into really stark, very stark. So Bhaskar Sunkara wrote a column for the New York Times a couple years ago, which was great, where he basically said, look, these are like mind spaces. They're not literal, but let's say you have Finland Station, which is Lenin going into the Soviet Union for the Soviet Revolution, and set everything else aside about the Soviet Union, blah, blah, blah. The goal of that in 1917 and what he was doing in that moment was the idea that you're going to have a greater democracy across every part of Russian society, political and economic. And then you have Singapore. Singapore world is, it's not democratic. It's very autocratic. And you know what? On the other hand, it does value efficiency. It has a respect for a certain type of multiculturalism because capitalism, as much as people, I think sometimes, frankly, we overestimate how wedded it is to white supremacist projects. It is, but it's also wedded to, look, if I'm doing global capitalism, I need the best person in that slot to some degree. There is some truth to that. And you see that in a place like Singapore. It's very multicultural in terms of we're all doing business and we're all producing things. And we're, if the best engineer is from Nigeria and the best, PR person is from, wherever, that's how it needs to be. Again, please, before I get all the tweets and comments, I know that there's still an enormous amount of problems in that system, but it is a different from the third area that Bhaskar pointed out, which is Hungary Station, as an exemplifying the resurgence of the barbarous neo-fascist right, Donald Trump, Orban, Bolsonaro. And a lot of us have said that basically the Democratic Party is on some version of that kind of Singapore world, which is basically let's have unequal, barbarous capitalism, but let's have a little bit of diversity at the top. If the only two choices in the world are between diversity at the top or apartheid capitalism, we pick diversity at the top. But people like us are still fighting for a world where there's actually justice and dignity for all as a possibility. Bloomberg, it seems to me, is the formalization, even down to him praising the Chinese model, of him actually talking about drug sentencing laws in Singapore, just like Trump has. Combine that with stop and frisk, not just as something in his background that he wants to disavow, but actually as a model. This is how it will look in polite society in the 21st century. It's not going to be Trump saying a whole bunch of shit. It's going to be like, well, that makes the most sense. And incidentally, we've got the Barack Obama internship program for, the handful of people that we're going to diversify our company with. That's what it is. And that model is going to be nationalized with Bloomberg.
Yeah, I think so. A lot of people talk about the racism in the clip that we found. That's not what bothers me the most. And, maybe it should, but I'm just desensitized to it. I cover racist shit every single day. But what bothered me the most was his governing philosophy, right? His governing philosophy of he sees a problem that he disapproves of. And what does Michael Bloomberg do? He takes an authoritarian style approach to it, sends in the troops to suppress a problem instead of using the power of the government to address the underlying conditions that lead to the problem. Right. So there's so many studies that I don't even have to start citing them because they're so numerous, showing a direct connection between poverty and crime and violence. So if you want to address crime and violence, the way to do that is to address poverty. But does Michael Bloomberg do that? No. What he does is he sends in the stormtroopers to shut it down and to crush all of the dissent. Same thing with the sugar tax there in New York, right? We have the video where he says that the way we're going to regulate the behavior of poor people, because we want them to live well, right, is to tax them so that we can have use the force of government in a punitive fashion to correct a problem that's not addressing the underlying condition. It's just a punishment for being poor instead of addressing the poverty, right? And so we have instance after instance, and again with guns, right? A lot of people applaud him for what he's doing with guns, but I hate to actually say, that's some authoritarian shit right there, right?
Yes.
And so he has an authoritarian vein in him that he justifies. It's well thought out. It's methodical. This is his deeply held worldview. This is not an anomaly for him. This is who he is. And that did not change just because he wanted to become president. And so he started apologizing. He just started apologizing so he could become president. But who he really is an authoritarian billionaire oligarch. The very worst of everything that we can imagine would come through his administration, because watch this. Who's going to check him? Who's going to tell him that we can't even control this one billionaire, was he worth $2 billion, Donald Trump? We can't
on his
control
vision
him.
board.
On his vision board, right? We can't control him. But now talk about a person who's the 9th richest person in America. Who is going to hold him accountable when he's buying the silence of so many people? Never mind the people he's buying endorsements from, and he's just outright hiring people and pouring money into their charitable organizations. But now he's able to buy silence. So my question is like, if you really believe in Michael Bloomberg, you really have to pause and ask yourself, who's going to hold him accountable when he begins to do what he has shown us he believes is the thing to do based on his governing philosophy, which is really authoritarian. I'm sorry.
And again, that loops back to the other point of like, well, how much of it with these people in the center and in the elite is it just, they don't like Trump's manners. And that's it.
That's it. Oh, no, absolutely. Like we've seen that on so many policies, right? They still voted for the military expansion. They still voted for Republicans, particularly voted for his tax cuts. They love the tax cuts, right? And so this is what I try to remind people all the time is that, Mayor Bloomberg, he can win. He could buy his way to the presidency, but he also wins if he loses to Donald Trump, right? So long as he stops Bernie Sanders, he wins, right? So his only problem I don't even think he has a problem with Donald Trump, right? Because the oafishness has become kind of a sideshow. It's become something that they can laugh about at cocktail parties, right? Have you seen what the president did lately, right? So I think he's not even offended by the behavior of Donald Trump. I don't think he's offended by Donald Trump. He loves the tax breaks that he just got from Donald Trump. He is not in this to beat Donald Trump. He's in this to beat Bernie Sanders particularly, and I think Elizabeth Warren secondarily.
The last thing I'll say on this, and I hope everybody will kind of do this as a social media thing at least. Mike Bloomberg, first and foremost, but also Tom Steyer for that matter. If they care about beating Donald Trump, the only thing they can do, and the only thing that I will not criticize them for, is put tens of millions of dollars into registering voters, particularly Hispanic voters in Arizona, which is going to be indispensable to winning a general election, and funding to the most lavish degree possible every type of voting rights attorney across this country, pay off people's fines that they have to pay in another utter absurdity in Florida to restore felons their voting rights. This is a way that you can both, God forbid, constructively influence American society and beat Trump. And if you don't do that,
then you're not serious about beating Trump.
That's it.
They're not serious about beating Trump. I think the one good thing is I saw a report that the fines and fees that former prisoners have to pay in Florida, I think a judge recently ruled over the weekend, if I'm not mistaken, that they do not have to pay those fines.
Okay, great.
I'm going off of memory, but you're right. That should be, if they're serious about stopping Trump, they would put their money there. Right. Not in a failed. But I mean, again, $14 billion is what he's going to. I don't think this is the conversation that we have to frame for everybody. If Bernie Sanders wins or Elizabeth Warren wins, he's going to pay $14 billion in taxes over 4 years. So what do you think his real motivation is? Do you think he really gives a shit about Donald Trump, or do you think he cares about that $14 billion? Because he wouldn't be a businessman if he didn't care about that $14 billion. And so I think part of the narrative has to be to convince enough Democratic voters that he is what he is. He is a Republican oligarch trying to save his tax dollars. And that's all he wants. And catch this, he can get that even if he loses to Donald Trump. So for a lot of people who believe he's in this to beat Donald Trump, we got to really show them that he wins. Michael Bloomberg wins even if Donald Trump wins.
Absolutely. And don't be a mark. Don't be a sucker. This is a billionaire who wants to buy your party and cut Social Security. Like, come on.
Yeah.
I mean,
like
seriously.
He just believed that 3 years ago. Like, how do you really believe a person who believes that we should cut Social Security, cut Medicare, and make people who pay who get Medicaid pay higher copays all the way up to the age of 76 all of a sudden saw the light, and he doesn't believe that anymore? Come on. He believes that. And when he gets in power, he is going to take the Democratic Party and solidify it with the Republican Party.
That's it. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.